Welcome to the On CP podcast. We're the podcast for health professionals and the wider community. We can explore diverse ideas in health, ask some hard questions, and have some honest conversations. My name is Archie. I'm EP based in Sydney's on the beaches, and joining me as always is allied health business owner Andrew. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well. It's 6:30, but it feels like 7:30 because it's been daylight savings over the weekend, and we're joined by a guest, another one in the long Honest EP history of bringing on our own team to talk on our podcast. Like we're getting all these big guests in. And Sam is a big guest.
A small guest.
Sam is a big guest. Been trying to get Sam on for 9 months.
Yes.
God, hard to working with her agents and
You know how it is.
her PR team and her executive assistant.
Yeah.
And we got her here. So Sam Murphy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get into you and what we're talking about, let's crack a beer.
Let's do it.
A thing, yeah. So what are we drinking, Sam?
We are drinking a Brookie Union ginger beer, a personal favourite. It's been a warm day and locally brewed here in Brookvale.
It's very nice.
Yeah.
It is a good ginger beer.
Yeah, appropriate.
So I went up to the old mate at the May Street liquor bottle-o,
Yeah.
who we always end up going to with the most limited selection in the world. And I was like, hey mate. He's like, all right. How's your day? He's like, oh, be better tomorrow. I was like, oh, what's going on tomorrow? He's like, well, I won't be here. I was like, okay, cool, great. Well, good stuff. And he was like, what are you after? I was like, ciders. He's like, over there. I opened the door. I was like, I don't see Brookvale Union anywhere. He's like, what's your favourite cider? I was like, Brookvale Union. He's like, you mean ginger beers? I was like, oh, fuck. Yes, that's what I meant. It's like, sorry, I have no idea where I am.
It's the daylight savings. It's getting to you.
It's getting to me. But It is delicious.
It is.
Sam, the reason we wanted to get you on here because you have so many cool things to talk about. You are an EP, and you work at Rebound, and you've been here for 3 years now.
Yeah.
But why don't you give us, to start, your how did I become an EP story that everyone has?
Yeah. So growing up, I always wanted to work in television. My mum was a TV producer, and I always thought I wanted to go down that path. And then Year 10 work experience I loved, but it also taught me that I didn't love it enough to go down that path. So I did a 180 twist and decided I wanted to work in science. Okay, no, let's start again. Future Archie, please delete the past.
What? That was good! Yeah. No, we will not delete that. We will continue on. That is absolutely...
This is a reality TV show,
Absolutely.
and you can't just edit shit out, Sam. That's not how this works. So, you did a 180 twist, and then you started at uni in science, and go on, where were you?
Okay, so then I decided...
Stop looking at the screen. You're banned from looking at the screen.
Okay, well, so I hate this. Okay, so
Dance.
then I decided that I would do a science degree. I think my life as a gymnast, getting injured quite a bit, like many people who get into the allied health space, that developed my interest in the musk side of things. And I decided to do exercise physiology the day before UWAC was due, where I met Kieran Rooney, who was the head of exercise physiology at the time. Yeah, because I knew I wanted to work in the chronic health condition space. And I was always very interested in cancer, seeing it a lot in my family. And then through uni, that interest, particularly in the cancer space, continued to grow. And I decided to do my honours in the cancer space. And then as I started working in a private practice setting, the interest continued to only grow. So I guess that's my special interest area story. It was quite organic, and the interest just kept growing and growing. And that process was quite easy for me. I didn't really need to look for a special interest. It kind of just happened quite early. And now I was a student here, and then I was lucky enough to get a job here, and I've been here for 3 years, and I love it. And I guess that's my story with how I got here.
That's a wonderful story.
Great story.
Beautiful.
Well done.
Thank you, everyone. Beautiful.
No edits required.
No edits
edits
required. We're good.
None at all.
So there you go. So, because we're going to talk about a couple of things today. we're going to talk about a book called Drive by Daniel Pink, which you've read recently. We want to talk a little bit about networking because it's something that you do really well. And
Thank you.
in such a short amount of time, you've built yourself this special interest network. And I think a lot of people could learn from your mindset around it and what you've done and how to like actually build that from the ground up. And also a little bit about students and that sort of thing as well. So first off, starting from when you were a student here, what for you was a really good placement? And then what have you taken from your first 3 years and now being a student supervisor as the most important things in a student placement?
Yeah. Most important thing as a student going on placement is when you know your supervisors genuinely care about you and your learning. So that's something I really prioritize in making sure the students feel like we genuinely care about them, which we really do. I think it's important that students are challenged. Nothing should be easy. Challenged in a healthy way. Giving students an appropriate level of challenge. So nothing that makes them feel like they're completely out of their depth. So when you're introducing a new challenge, making sure... It was really nice as a student being trusted enough to approach a new challenge, but also being supported in preparing for it. So that's something I prioritize these days with students as well. And honest feedback, because feedback is where you're learning. Whether it's positive or constructive feedback, that is the learning process. So prioritizing celebrating students when they do a good job, but also giving them that constructive feedback when it's necessary too.
Nice. That's very nice. Andrew, students are obviously an important part of Rebound and what we do here. For you to... what is the overall importance of a student program to you, and why is it so important that we do creating a really good student program is such an important part of being a business?
There's two answers to that. The first answer is that it's a great pathway to getting people in the door for future jobs. I think the way that we view a lot of student placements is it's like a job interview for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and the students that engage well and resonate with our clients very well are the ones that we kind of tap on the shoulder for, like, hey, have you got any plans for next year? But secondly, and probably more importantly, is that we see student mentoring as a pathway to actually looking after members of the team and becoming a mentor or supervisor for the team, because we believe in promoting from within. So from like a business perspective, like Sam just mentioned about practicing giving honest feedback and practicing pitching content that's at the right level to people, at the right level to students as they come in, is a great training for when they then look after other members of the team. That's why we invest a lot. And Sam has invested a lot in building out our amazing student program, is because it is great for the business and it's great for recruitment.
There's a couple points to that. On your first point, that you want to see students for 5 to 10 weeks with your clients, and it's almost like a job interview. But it's also like you're on show as well as a business, because you can ask a student if they'd like to come back next year, but they'll say no if they really dislike the place you're at. And very often we have students come in here and we go, hey, how have your other placements been? And they go, oh, it sucked at this place. I was like, oh shit, why did it suck? It's like, oh, they just made me do everything, or they didn't talk to me, or they didn't let me do anything. So it's clearly a balance of meeting people where they're at to actually make them like where you are. So it's not like, oh, do student program, therefore get EPs. It's like, run a really good student program and people will want to work for you.
On the job interview thing, I do think it's important for students to look at placements as a potential job interview for 6 weeks or whatever, 6 to 10 to 15 weeks.
6 to 10 to 15.
Who runs the student program? But at the same time, I encourage students not to get really stressed about that, to try to be because job interviews are not normal. They're a nerve-wracking experience. So it is really nice when students are themselves on placement, but also if we are giving feedback, that students don't get too caught up in it. And it's really positive if students take on the feedback, really listen, maybe ask questions about what we're giving feedback on and engage on it well, reflect well on the feedback and then act on it. But I think it's that mindset of keeping in mind that your placement very well could be a 6 to 10 to 15 week job interview, but at the same time, it's important to enjoy the process and make the most of it. And if you don't know something, take some initiative and do extra research in your free time. And if you get constructive feedback, it's because your supervisors genuinely care about you and your learning, and not let the job interview banner stress you out and think that if you have gotten feedback that you're horrible. This is, while it could be a job interview experience and we are looking at how people perform on placement, it is also a learning experience. And receiving that feedback, how students respond to it, I guess also tells us a lot about them too, which I guess brings my head back to the job interview space. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's important that people aren't really uptight and stressed while they're on placement because you're thinking of it as a job interview. It is still a learning experience. But how you respond to challenges and feedback and maintaining a growth mindset is something that we as supervisors really, really value. And I hope that that doesn't get lost in the job interview mindset. Does that make sense? The balance between this is a learning experience, but it also reflects on you as a future practitioner, how you respond to this.
Like we want to see the normal you that we would see coming into work every day, not the 40-minute job interview stressed. I'm on show thing. And you being on show for 5 weeks is not what we want to see. We want to see you, and we want to see you and how you respond to doing something in a way that we give feedback on, and then how you actually grow and respond to that feedback. That's a more interesting thing for us than like, wow, they did everything by the book perfectly and they were super polite the entire time. It's like, no, let's, be yourself, be fun. And when you stuff something up, because everyone stuffs things up, then how do you respond to the feedback that we give you and grow from it and come back stronger? Because that's more closely related to being an employee than, not.
That's it. And getting on with the team well and having good banter with the team. It's all important.
So then how do we look at that from the flip side of being a student supervisor and going, what do you think a good student supervisor does?
I think number one, making it clear that you care about the student, celebrating wins, providing feedback when it's necessary in a manner that suits how the student likes to receive feedback.
So you got to find that out first as
well
then.
Yes. Challenging students appropriately, finding out what they would like to get out of their placement, whether it's a special interest area or something that they'd like to work on after their previous placements that they've noticed perhaps a knowledge gap. I think it's important that supervisors are always a cheerleader for the student as well, and always seek to understand, which is something that Archie, for those of you listening at home, Archie and I spend a lot of time musing concepts. We like to sit and muse and just chat about things. And seeking to understand is, I guess, a concept. Also, Andrew and I in the leadership course, for those of you listening at home again, Andrew runs an in-house leadership course that we finished a few weeks ago now. And that was a fortnightly meeting for 6 months. And that's really important, seeking to understand behaviours, whether they're positive or something that students can improve on. And making sure students feel very welcomed, I think, is the final one I'll touch on for now. Seeking to understand, I think, is a really important concept, and it's one that I only properly came across last year in terms of like an actual concept rather than just in everyday doing it. But the idea is that before you actually provide any constructive feedback to someone, you first seek to understand what their reasons were for doing something, in case that explains it for them, for you as well. And it actually, they end up giving themselves the feedback, or they actually give a good reason for what they did
and then you can have a very productive conversation around it. Andrew, is this something that, like a concept that you use in all of your business mentoring?
It is, and there's a lovely concept that runs alongside this, which is assuming positive intent. So it's the assumption that people have done what they've done from thinking that it is the right thing to do. And if you can look at behavior through that lens, you're not then confronting people with, well, you did this and that's a bad thing to do. It's like, help me understand how the decision making that led you to do that, because it's also like a less direct and a less less confronting thing for people to have to come across. But it also makes you stop, and it makes you just get outside of your head for a minute and just go why would somebody do that? What would be the thinking that made them think that was a good idea to do that thing? And just that pause, it's it can be enough to just stop the advice monster. They're I know the solution and I'm just going to tell them that they're wrong. Which sometimes is the case, but at least pausing is irrelevant.
How do you... So say you take that pause and you go, wait, no, I should assume positive intent. How do you say that in practice without going, so I assume you had positive intent here? Because I assume that might come across a little degrading.
What? I think it's internal for a start.
Yeah. Assuming good positive intent.
But
very negative. Yeah.
So help me understand it. What the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. Well, that, right? What are you doing? You crazy human. Yeah. Yeah. It's what was your question?
How do you actually? Oh, is it more of an internal dialogue, assuming positive intent?
It's more of an internal dialogue.
Okay, gotcha.
And it's not just in a clinical context as well. This is a very wide-reaching context. But when you do that, you're not just assuming that people are doing wrong because they're just fucking idiots and they are doing it just to piss you off. The assumption is that they're doing it for the right reason. In fact, the assumption is that people are good. Right? People are good, and why their behaviours is just their way of acting out how they think good fits in that particular context.
So you'd see that from mentoring business owners, the perspective there. And then, Sam, you'd see it from students as well, that everything they do, they're trying to do for the right reason, whether it's saying something to a client that maybe wasn't the correct way to say it, or jumping in at a time that wasn't the perfect time, or not sure, some other thing. But then I guess we'd see it with our clients as well when we ask them, so what have you done leading up to coming to see me for this injury or this condition or whatever? And they tell you some things that in your head you go, well, that wasn't the right thing to do. But instead of jumping in and going, well, why did you do that? We can probably pause there and assume that they were trying to do it for the right reasons, and perhaps seek to understand a little bit more about what was the reasoning for them trying to do this certain thing a certain way. And that might actually give us a much more interesting way to assess them and help them by doing a movement experiment or breaking down a belief or that kind of thing. So I feel like that works at many, many levels.
I feel like, not to be dramatic, but being an exercise physiologist here and also looking after students here has made me a much better practitioner. I guess if I'm focusing on looking after students has made me, a much better practitioner.
Well done,
Okay, everyone shut up. Looking after students, and our discussions, Andrew and Archie and I have had all about things like seeking to understand and assuming positive intent and the notion. So when, I don't know if this is secret information, so just cut this out if this is not, but when you start working here, you receive a book, Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. And my main takeaway from that book was the notion that clear is kind. And that is something I've taken in my practice, in my leadership for students, but also in everyday life as a housemate and a friend and just a general human being. it's one of those concepts, coming back to my main point, that looking after students has made me a better practitioner, coming off your point of assuming positive intent and seeking to understand with clients, but then also a better person in general. It's interesting, the far-reaching impact of these concepts on people's life. And I hope we can pass that on to others with this podcast and pass it on to our students as well.
Absolutely. It's a very big brain way to think about it. I like that.
Thank you, sir.
Why don't we talk on books?
Okay.
You've got a book sitting in front of you, and it's called Drive, and it's by Daniel H. Pink. We've referenced this book a lot over the last... Well, did you realise our first podcast was in August of 2021?
Holy shit.
Yeah.
No, I did
And
not
it's
know
now
that.
2024.
Podcast is old.
Podcast is old. We're
Happy
old.
birthday.
Thank you. Happy, wait, 2, 3, yeah. Wait, happy 2.5 year podcast birthday. Very good. Thank you, Sam.
That's okay.
We've talked about this book a lot, but Sam, you said that you would like to actually talk about the book.
Yeah.
Tell us about what your main takeaways were from this book.
You know what? I think this and a lot of the books that I read, Andrew, with the leadership course, provided a lot of insight towards a lot of the nuances around the culture at Rebound Health are very intentional. And I was naive as to how much effort goes into building these nuanced aspects of our culture. And one of them that I found really interesting that you and I spoke about quite a bit in our musings were the type I and the type X behaviors. So are you two familiar? Do you remember?
Medium.
Medium.
But put me with all the viewers, the listeners.
The viewers.
The listener listening, and remind us what the personalities are.
So essentially, the book Drive is all about motivation, and they challenge different types of motivations. There's 3 types of motivation that they discuss in the book. Number 1 is our survival instinct of we must do this, otherwise death. Mm-hmm. Motivation type 2.0 is the kind of outdated, I am motivated by a reward. And then the book is discussing this whole motivation 3.0 that's a lot more off the top of my head about enjoying the process of performing a task and the challenge of it and the more intrinsically motivated activities or people, you know what I mean? It's 7 p.m. on a Monday night. But the type I and the type X behaviors type X describes a person who's very extrinsically motivated and is doing something for a reward, whereas a type I person is someone who I touched on it already, really enjoys the process of doing something and they enjoy the challenge. And they discussed this in terms of when they developed Wikipedia, another company, I think it was Microsoft, tried to make their own version of Wikipedia and they hired all these people and from memory they were going to pay them very well. And that project never finished. But Wikipedia, which was full of volunteers doing this exciting challenge that they were just interested in, Wikipedia, we all are very familiar with Wikipedia and what it's become now. Do not reference it in a uni assignment, but still a nice example for this. But reflecting on the humans we have who work here at Rebound Health, I would consider all of us embody very much type I behaviors. All of us, I think, are very motivated by how meaningful our work is. And they go through in this book the ingredients you need to develop a type 1 person, because they talk about a lot as well. Type 1 is not natural. You are made to be a type I person. Sorry, everyone. That's type I is what I mean. That's not born, that's created. And
really?
Correct.
Interesting.
That's what they discuss in the book. And the ingredients to that were components like having autonomy in your work, an appropriate level of challenge where you feel driven to do more, but you never fully reach a level of mastery, which I think is so important as well. I think anecdotally, it's really important to always feel challenged, because once everything feels easy, I would find it really difficult to be engaged. But it was interesting because I reflect on the people that work here, and I think a lot of the employees embody such type I behaviors. And then I reflect on the processes we have at Rebound Health in terms of the freedom we have to pursue our own interests, whether it's networking with people that we're interested in, delivering presentations, seeking to find ideal clients through going to events and things like that. We have the freedom to do our own thing a little bit. We're not super routinized. We have quite a lot of freedom in our work. And I just thought it was an interesting musing, and Andrew and I would muse on type I and type X behaviors in the workplace and what goes into developing type I people.
That's very interesting.
I think they talk about it in the book as well, in the schooling system, where if you're a type X learner, you are just learning to get the grades. But type I learners are very much learning because they enjoy the challenge of the learning and actually seeking to understand the information that they're taking on, and they want to know the relevance of the information in their real life. So I guess as a supervisor, that's something that I want to really promote with the students as well, is that they're not here just to get good marks and leave, that the whole process should be rewarding in terms of it's challenging and it's meaningful and relevant to their career progression and things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. Andrew, as a director, how early was this intentional for you to not have that as part of a structure, but like encourage people to be more autonomous?
I think quite early. I think that there's certain people that came on board in sort of the early phases of our growth where it was very clear that they were much smarter than me and they had a lot more insight into other areas that I knew much less about. And it was more like, okay, go and do those things. And that wasn't because I read a book. That was just like, sure. Like if you are interested in that area, like I will support you to do that. There wasn't, it wasn't until much later that like you read these books and you're like, that's put like meaning and words behind what the intention was early on.
For people who are either employing people or working with other people, do you think it's an important thing to do early on or at like every stage of business to encourage people to do their own thing?
It's interesting because there are some business owners that like, no, it is the job of the owner to get the clients for the team and the team see the clients. And my experience with that has been, it's very difficult to grow sustainably if it's all reliant on one person to grow. But then, like, when I, many years ago, was seeing clients, like, I had my established referral pathways, and that was for a very specific and niche sort of client. So I could probably grow a few caseloads of adults with psychosocial disabilities, but there might be some people who came into the team. It's like, well, that's not really my thing. So it would really hinder our growth if it was just on me to do that. But I appreciate that, like, there are some established practices that's like, no, that is the job of the owner to do. But I don't, certainly here, like, we want to be encouraging people to go and build their own networks and find out the type of clients that they like working with, and then give them the guidance and the resources to go and build those connections for themselves. I think for us and the type of culture that we have, the people that do really well like that, they're motivated by doing that, whereas there might be some people who don't want that. They want to just go to work, see the clients, and then go home. And that's fine. Like, there is no right and wrong here. It's just more along the lines of how well would that sort of a personality type fit in this culture? Probably not that great. Or there would probably be a lifespan to that.
But that personality would work very well at some workplaces, some healthcare clinics, right?
Absolutely. And so this is the thing with culture, is that there isn't like a perfect culture. There are cultures that exist, and it's about aligning, the motivations of the person with the culture, so that they feel like this is a rewarding place for them. That's okay. We have a culture. The clinic down the road has a different culture, and that's fine. It's more just pairing up
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. It's almost just pairing up the values of the personality of the person with the values and the personality of the place you're working at. And if they align, then that's your culture.
That's it.
That's
Yeah.
it. And if it's not,
the culture is just the consistent values, right?
Yeah,
It's bringing people
exactly.
together that have consistent values, and you can write them down and put them on a board and say, well,
Ta-da.
this becomes the job interview. This becomes how well does your personal life align with the values that we collectively have as a group of people. And if it does, well, that's good. Like, here's your job offer. And if it doesn't, like, if you're not interested in making connections, if you're not interested in being or exploring different approaches to treatment, if you are very fixed in your way of thinking, like, that's fine. But like, that's probably not here.
Yeah,
And that's okay.
And there's probably a place where that would suit in really, really well. I remember watching a video from, it was like a team, what do you call it? Getaway retreat for Kerwin Ray's company, K1 or K2 or whatever they're called. He's a big business kind of
Businessman.
What does he do? He like coaches other businesses?
Yeah,
Or
he does business coaching.
does business coaching. And it was
He's like Tony Robbins. He's
an Australian muscly Tony Robbins. There you go. Who swears a bit more and is obsessed with AI. Yeah, he's very good. Anyway, he was talking to his team about their culture, and their culture was very much a high-performing culture, where he was like, we have a very high rate of people leaving, or very like a low retention rate of staff. And he was proud of that because he's like, not everyone is for us. It's like, we are not for everyone. That we are a very particular kind of people who like to work a certain way and push for, our boundaries and that kind of thing a certain way. And people come in and they don't like it and they leave, and that's fine because we don't want people who aren't like us. And I was like, oh, that's very, very interesting because for a lot of businesses it would be the opposite. It's like, no, we want like the highest retention rate ever, especially in healthcare. Like, you lose an employee and you go, fuck, that's a lot of time and money invested into this person, and when they leave, it's like, well, now we've got to start again. Oh my goodness, and here we go again. And that's really, really difficult. But for them, they're like, fuck yeah, we don't care. We'll get the next high-performing person. So it's very different. And it's obviously works very well for them, right?
Absolutely. So I'm interested in how this concept applies to students.
Yeah.
So the concept of like autonomy and mastery, like how can we give a third or a fourth year those things?
Yeah, well, I think with autonomy, it's nice. She's on his second drink. All right, sir. It's nice that they have the freedom to explore what they're interested in. So I know we here and I did a supervisor course through Sydney Uni. We and a lot of the other placement sites have weekly-ish learning tasks with the students, and they're tailored to the students' interests / things that they may have knowledge gaps in. So I think the fact that they have some autonomy in what they're learning about, and there's always opportunities for students to do more if they would like to in terms of social media stuff for Rebound Health, or I don't know if this is a secret, but I'm going to say it. We have our Student Hub, which is essentially a website that students can access during and after their placement here.
Which Sam built.
Oh, Andrew's idea. With also colleagues adding to it, and like students have also the ability to add to it. So I think opportunities for students to dive into areas that may give them more purpose. And what was your other question? How these concepts apply in the student setting?
Yeah. If we know that, you tend to get the most out of people by giving them a bit of an opportunity to show themselves, like you were talking about before, like show up as yourself.
Yeah.
How can we foster that?
Yeah, well, the autonomy thing is a big thing. Purpose is a big part of it as well. genuinely knowing what the students' interests are. I think, honestly, it's really nuanced to the person. There are a few ingredients outlined in the book Drive, but reflecting on, and I don't think I'm the perfect supervisor, which is good. I think there's always space to grow, and I think that's a good mindset to have. But making sure that students are always challenged, which they should be. If they're still at uni and they're at a private practice clinic, they should absolutely be challenged the whole time because our work is not easy. Making sure they're appropriately challenged so it's not too scary, but they're not doing anything. They have an appropriate level of responsibility. I think those are the main three things. Making sure that they understand the relevance of what they're doing, that there's strong purpose behind it, whether it's purpose of special interest areas or they understand the importance of what they're doing right now for their future, an appropriate level of challenge, an appropriate level of autonomy where they know they can go, hey, Sam, I actually really want to learn a little bit more about Parkinson's or cancer, or I'd love to make some Instagram content for Rebound Health. They do have the freedom to do that. So in summary, challenge, autonomy, purpose would be my top three things that I think we do here to foster that in students. I think also, like I touched on before, showing students that we genuinely care about them and always assuming positive intent and seeking to understand. So students enjoy the process of learning here and they feel like they can ask us questions and that this is a meaningful opportunity to learn. I think that's also really important, that they're not just here to get this part of their degree ticked off. They are here to get as much as they possibly can out of their time here. Which I also have to thank the team because everyone who works here is so willing to give the students their time and knowledge. Yeah.
Which in turn is really good practice for the team.
Yeah.
To, when we talk about like the benefits of having a student program, the second benefit of having a student program is that the team gets practice in mentoring and giving feedback and teaching the right amount of, giving the right amount of information. Because, we come out of uni and a lot of EPs, a lot of just healthcare practitioners in general, a lot of people who know a lot about different subjects are great at saying a lot of things, but not necessarily great at giving the right amount of information to people or knowing what the right amount is. And a student might ask, or a team member might ask, hey, why is it okay to lift with my back bend? Oh, I don't know, some kind of random thing. And then one person might go and just like drown them in information for 15 minutes. It's like, well, you gave them a lot of information, but did they learn anything? Probably not. It was like, probably would have been a better way to take your time, ask them some more questions about what they think and where the gaps in their knowledge are, and then just provide a little bit of information. And that's good practice. You
know what, Archie?
What?
I learnt that from you.
Oh, did
For
you
those
now?
listening, Archibald hates a comment, so he's dying right. He hates a compliment, so he's dying right now. But I know when I started looking after students, I found it difficult not to give answers and rather using Seek to Understand as a learning opportunity. So I feel like you can use Seeking to Understand in the giving feedback sense, but also in the explaining concepts and understanding how much students know and getting them to kind of figure out answers themselves, which is also important in having conversations with patients too, that we're not giving patients answers all the time, that we can help them reflect on their own experience and maybe come to realizations themselves. But I know when I first started looking after students, that's something that I approached you and I said, naturally, I feel like I'm not a very good teacher. And you said, what do you mean you're not a good teacher? And that's something I found really difficult, is being asked a question where you know the answer and you think you can explain it well, but not explaining it because you can explain the answer well, explaining it in a manner that teaches the other person in the most effective way possible.
Yeah. It's that writing reflex thing of someone does something and you want to just tell them exactly how to do it, exactly what's in your brain. You just want to like take it out of your brain and put it in their brain.
Yeah.
But that's not the best way for people to learn. The best way for people to learn is to work it out themselves, so they actually create the connections of like, oh, this leads to this, rather than this is the answer. It's like working out maths problems with a calculator versus actually learning how to do the maths problem
Yes.
is very, very different. And you don't learn how to do maths on a calculator.
That's
You've got to
it.
like learn how to do the working out. And it's the same with concepts and knowledge as well. And as a bonus, it is way easier for the person trying to teach the person as well, because then you have to talk less, you have to expend less energy, and
Maybe not at the start though. I found that quite challenging
interesting.
at
Like
the
staying
start.
quiet.
Not necessarily staying quiet, but knowing what the most productive questions to ask would be.
Taking time. I know Andrew is very, very good at this. And I, this is like a chain of learning here.
A chain of learning.
I learned this from Andrew, is that when someone asks you a question, you don't have to jump in and act like you know the answer straight away. You can take a second to think of the best way to answer the question. And having the pause and having the thinking time might mean you come up with a much better answer. Which I imagine Andrew learnt that from someone. And it's a whole cycle of learning. And that was Sam's mum who taught Sam. And it's a cycle of learning. There you go. It's now a cycle.
You know what's interesting as well? Having consumed a lot of leadership content through Andrew's course is noticing different concepts or information that might contradict different books or podcasts, whatever, and then being able to choose what I like best or what would suit the rebound culture best. So something in Drive, and I really liked this book, but that I disagreed with, was that they promoted giving feedback in private. Sorry, positive feedback to be specific in private, so that it's maybe... Off the top of my head, I did read this a few months ago and I can't remember reviewing it over the weekend, but I can't remember the reasons why. But I really like, and a lot of the other books that I read for this course was the notion of giving positive feedback in public and then constructive feedback in private. And I find it anecdotally a lot easier to give constructive feedback in private when I have given a lot of positive feedback in public, because the person I'm giving the feedback to knows that I think that they're good and they know that I'm giving the feedback because I genuinely care about them. So that's an interesting concept that I disagreed with in Drive.
Which is also totally fine.
Yeah. Do you find giving feedback difficult?
I find it a lot easier now with practice, and something that I keep in mind, coming back to the notion of clear is kind. I think it's really nice, like you touched on, Andrew, having read about these concepts in books, it really validates the concept that maybe you were doing by yourself naturally, but I think it just really validates the whole process of, okay, this is why I'm giving this feedback, and I am actually being kindest to you and you're learning right now by giving you this constructive criticism that's going to be very beneficial for you long term, but it could be a difficult conversation right now. Yeah, with practice, it's become a lot easier, but with the information as well that I've learnt through you and through the books that you get us to read through courses or through being hired here has made it a lot easier. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting how, now that you do feel more confident, very confident giving like clear, constructive feedback, it probably eats you up inside a little bit less. And that's what I notice a lot with people who aren't very confident in giving constructive feedback or talking to someone about something that's, pissing them off or something, is that they then ruminate and it sits inside their head and they're, fuck, all these people and all these things, they just piss me off all the time. Oh, that really icks me about when that person does that and that person does that. It's like, have you talked to him about it? It's like, no, I can't do that.
And you know what? Me interrupting, sorry Archie, but I think it's, again, with being a cheerleader for whoever you're looking after, whether it's a student or a mentee, I think giving that feedback, depending on how they like to receive feedback, but often I'm noticing people like it as early or as soon to an event as possible, as close to the event as possible. If you give that feedback straight away, there isn't much time to build resent against them, which I think is very important, and it makes it so much easier to keep that assuming positive intent and seeking to understand behaviours.
Absolutely. And it's what you would do for people you care about most, is you want them to not be pissing you off, right?
And you know what? To bring up a kind of random point, but Archie and I mused on this a little bit a while ago. I remember, Archie, you told me you were in, I don't know, some sort of Zoom meeting and someone had asked you, they were in a situation where they were going to be a mentor for someone that they were friends with, and they were really concerned about that relationship of being friends outside of work, but then now having to be the person to often give that really difficult feedback. And for those of you listening at home, Archie and I are really, really good friends outside of work, and were before I started working here. And then, 2 years ago, maybe after a year or a year and a half of me working here, Archie became the head exercise physiologist here. So he's running all our mentoring sessions, and he is my mentor now. And it was interesting because your response to that question was that you found it quite uncomfortable at the start, but then got used to it. But for me as a mentee, I loved it because I knew that we had the trust, and I knew that you knew I was good at my job, and I felt so much more comfortable coming to you with advice or whatever, or questions. And I found that transition, it was really easy at work to go, okay, here's my mentor, and we are having productive mentoring conversations, and then outside of work be completely normal. I thought that was only amazing for the whole mentee-mentor experience. And it was interesting that you had a slightly different experience.
I found it hard. Not because I was like, oh shit, now I need to give Sam, feedback on all this stuff, because you're right, you are very good at your job, which probably made that a lot easier. I was like, thank God we didn't have to have lots of difficult chats. I don't know what that would be like. But
also, if I do need to have a bit of a serious conversation with you, it's not uncomfortable for me, because
now it's very easy, right?
We have that baseline. I know he genuinely cares, and that he thinks I'm good at my job, and he's only giving this feedback because he wants the best for my career progression. So I thought that was just something interesting to share because of our musings on the topic.
I imagine it could be very difficult for a lot of people. It took me maybe a month or two to get used to it, but there was also because I was taking on your mentoring sessions and everyone else's at the same time. So it was that compiled with like, oh fuck, I've got to do this for like everyone. So it was a bit of a shock to the system. But I imagine it could be a very difficult situation for some people, especially if they're not very comfortable with like clear, direct conversations. Which naturally I quite enjoy clear, direct conversations. Andrew, I think it's something you've learnt to like
it
more?
was very, very difficult at the
Really?
start. Yeah, really difficult. I hated it.
Wow.
I remember writing down like the words that I would say to
You're
people
like Lauren,
because
aren't
because it was horrifying for me. But yeah, you learn, and the more you do it, the more you practice it,
I think I've learned
doesn't
too.
hurt as much.
I remember at our first retreat that I was there for in 2021, we were all asked how we like to receive feedback, and my answer was that I liked it to be sugar-coated, because in my own head I was already often quite aware of whatever feedback someone had to give me, and I wanted it to be quite kind and sugar-coated, which is completely fine. But I have done a full 180, and I really enjoy very direct, no space for me to guess what they really mean. Tell me as soon as possible, as clear as possible, that's fine. And I was talking to a colleague about that recently, Archie, and we were discussing, well, very likely the role that you had to play in that, in your mentoring, and I've just responded really well to it, and now that's how I like to receive feedback as a person.
Yeah.
So you've changed me.
How good's that? I mean, I am naturally a very efficient human that I'm like.
Not to toot my own flute, but
I don't think that's like I don't think that's a brag. Like I just like to find the most efficient way to do things.
Yeah.
And like sugarcoating is at its core like an inefficient process, because I'm like coating the thing that I need to say in stuff that like I should have already said beforehand at a different time. So like if I needed to tell someone that they're really good at something, well, I should have already voiced that. I shouldn't be waiting to the time that I need to tell them something not so great that they're good at other things. Like now I'd put myself in that situation myself. So the much more efficient way to do it is to celebrate people, like you were saying, when they do things well. So then when you get to the thing where you need to give them some honest stuff, then you don't have to continue to celebrate them on top of, so you don't have to soften the blow of like, hey, can you try this? Or, go through the process of seeing you understand, blah, blah, blah. Get to a point where you need to provide constructive feedback. You could just provide the feedback, which is way more efficient and way easier for every party then. But yes, you need to have the human ready to receive that.
Yeah.
I think it's clearly a point where you're also more confident in your own skills and in your own place as an EP that you are okay not having sugar-coated feedback as well.
I agree.
Whereas I think sugar-coating is often required where there's a level of like still uncertainty or imposter syndrome or lack of complete self-confidence in what I do on the majority of the time is the correct thing or the right thing to do. So people need that little bit of extra encouragement, which ideally would be just provided all the time. And then, the way to actually become better is to be helped by some honest and constructive feedback every so often.
I think also when you first start work or placement, which is completely normal, there's going to be a lot more head noise at the beginning. Head noise being questions or thinking about all the possible different options you could have taken in various situations. Whereas with experience, the head noise kind of dwindles and there's less space for second guessing. And I think with that self-assurance and that experience and knowing that you are good at your job and that your mentor knows that you're good at your job, you're able to just take on feedback and run with it rather than ruminate on the what ifs behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. In my experience here of either providing constructive feedback to people or helping other people have honest conversations with other people, it's been way better actually having the conversation directly rather than trying to go around in circles with sugarcoating and that kind of thing, icing sugar and all that kind of stuff. But to do that, everyone needs to have a level of caring personally for each other, which comes back to like radical candor stuff. That, the only way to actually provide good constructive feedback in a way that's going to be taken in the correct way is having people know that you care personally about them. So if you are going to, in inverted commas, sugarcoat something, like sugarcoat it by showing that you care personally rather than like saying, hey, you're really good at this, but do this, but you're also really good at this. It's like, that's a shit sandwich. A better one is, I really care about you personally, so I think you should do this. Blah. Done. Just, it's like way more clear.
I think that's where it's also really nice in the student setting to make an effort to actually get to know the students as people through the phone call before they start and organising your lunch breaks to be at the same time as them or going, if you have a break at the same time, getting coffee with them so you can understand them as people. And I think it helps them understand the whole care personally behind of this radical candor, which you two, I don't need to explain because you talk about this all the time, approach towards giving feedback. So again, there's a lot of method behind nuanced behaviors in the leadership team here that I'm starting to become very aware of. And I think it's important, for everyone to be aware of these things because the impact is just amazing.
Absolutely. That's what the podcast is.
Oh my gosh, the Honest
This
EP
is why
pod.
we're here.
That's why we're here.